I'm Mayor Tommy Roberts. Welcome back to the Mayor's Table. My guest this morning is Rob Mays, City Manager at the City of Farmington. Rob, this morning I want to talk about a topic in general, maybe not so much specifics, although I think you may get into some specifics, but we want to talk about, in general, the importance of infrastructure improvements to a community like ours and the importance of those improvements to our citizens. And so I'm just going to throw it to you, and maybe you can talk about the status of infrastructure improvements across communities across the United States, and then kind of bring it back home.
Well, I appreciate that introduction because it's a huge topic. I know I'm a lot more interested in it than most people are. And I find myself looking at infrastructure differently when I drive around to other communities and cities. I pay attention to sidewalks and water tanks and electric infrastructure and things that I've ignored or were invisible to me most of my life. But the fact is that public infrastructure in our nation is really at a crisis level. The American Society of Civil Engineers every 4 years puts out a report card nationally on our infrastructure. It rates 14 areas from airports to bridges, dams, schools, levees, parks, transit system, wastewater, sewer, the grid, roads, everything imaginable. And unfortunately, our grade for the United States is a D+. Mm-hmm. The only actual passing or reasonably passing infrastructure in our nation is our railroad system. Uh-huh. Almost everything else ranges from D-, on down. So it's a real problem. So we need to take it seriously. And this is orange barrel season, and I know that we have pushed people to the limits in terms of inconvenience. But the fact is, it's critically important that we maintain investment in our infrastructure. Too many elected officials around this nation, for convenience and popularity, have been willing to kick the can down the road. Our elected officials have not been guilty of that. They have, for example, in our water and waste department, we have what's called the R&R, renewal and replacement. There's a segment of our bill that has to be dedicated and has to be spent on that. And roads, same thing. A dedicated portion of our taxes has to go to roads, because this community has long ago recognized that we value infrastructure and realize we have to keep up with it.
Well, we've talked in past segments of the Mayor's Table about our local investment in our wastewater treatment facility, and we're planning for the future. We're planning for economic growth, and we're hopeful that at some point in time we'll start to see a regrowth of our population. We have lost some population over the last 5 to 6 years, but we know that that's cyclical, and it always has been in Farmington. But we know that there's going to be a very significant discussion nationally about how to fund infrastructure needs throughout our country. But it doesn't really help us at the local level, where we see those needs on the ground. They're right next door to us.
That's right.
And we drive on the roads. We use the water and the wastewater. And so we see day in, day out the need for improvements. And I agree with you that the City of Farmington has been somewhat progressive in planning for those needs, and I think definitely can demonstrate that we spent millions of dollars on upgrading infrastructure. I want you to bring it closer to home now and talk a little bit about what has been done in Farmington.
Yeah. Well, I think what's impressive too is we've talked in the past about we have relatively low taxes, relatively low water rates, comparatively low electricity rates, and that is inclusive of the fact that we invest back in our community. So this has been a very, very busy orange barrel season, as we've talked about it, but I'll step back and talk about, for example, roads. So our national road rating is a D. New Mexico's is, they don't rate the states, they just list problems, but they say in the state of New Mexico that every single motorist is paying $594 a year in car damage from roads across our state. So these things come right back to roost, and they're not just, if we don't fix roads, we damaged our vehicles and so forth. So We did a lot of paving this year. Paving was only one area of our infrastructure that we focused on. We paved 57 miles of lane miles this year. That's complete repaving. On top of that, hundreds of miles, or not hundreds of miles, but hundreds of sections of neighborhood streets. And if you look at a map of our what we would call I lost the word there for a minute, but the crack sealing, where we go through and maintain the entire city almost looks like it's been crack sealed. You mentioned the wastewater treatment plant. It's a $22 million project. 20th Street, of course, has been one that's been a 2-year project that's been extremely difficult for the public, and we recognize that. And maybe we bit off more than we could chew in one time. But while you're doing these projects, you've got to do it at the same time for efficiency. So that was we buried the electric lines, built new required ADA sidewalks, new storm sewer in that road, and new water lines, and then of course repavement. And it's just about done, or essentially really completely done at this point. Some final touch up on striping and things, and it's a beautiful roadway. I've already had 2 business owners call me last week telling me how much they've appreciated it. So hopefully we'll forget the pain of that 2-year project. Lots and lots of paving, as I mentioned. We focused this year on our main arterial routes: Pinyon Hills Boulevard, College, Butler, 30th, 20th, and again, lots of crack sealing in residential streets. We spent this year on infrastructure, and this is what's phenomenal, just a kind of a soundbite. We spent $60 million, the city of Farmington, in the last year in reinvesting in our infrastructure, without raising taxes, outside of our low rates and our low taxes. And so that's pretty incredible. $23 million alone in our electric infrastructure. You cannot neglect the grid. Nationally has a score of a D. Lots of problems with reliability. We have reliable electricity because we invest in that grid. 23 million last year alone. 7.75 million of new water lines were installed last year. 14 million of sewer, but that also counts about half the work on the wastewater treatment plant. A variety of road projects, widening roads, other improvements, about $1 million. $661,000 maintaining our park system. Our public parks in the United States have a D+ rating in terms of, so things like even parks are starting to dilapidate and get outdated. We invest in our parks, and then again about $4 million of paving. So I'm really proud of our staff, our team, and appreciate the support of our elected officials, and want to thank the public for their patience. I know I've even found myself impatient, with the orange barrels, but recognize the good outcome that's there.
The paving season is coming to a close, I would imagine. We may have another month where paving can be done.
It wraps up now. The pretty quick here. The contract crews go home in other areas, and then we can't get the asphalt they can't make it. So it's pretty close to ending.
And this has been a season which it seems that there's been a higher level of emphasis placed on repaving. You've pointed out that that's been focused on the major thoroughfares. What would you anticipate our paving program to be like next year?
Well, probably similar. We've dedicated this amount of money. As I mentioned, we have a dedicated portion of our taxes that go towards it. Maybe not this. Maybe the mix won't be exactly the same between residential and as many of the arterial roads that were this year, but similar in terms of the volume. That's just what it takes. Our overall score, is hanging in there at about a C+ in our roads, and so we're not ahead. We're not too far behind. We're ahead of the national average, but it's important that we keep investing.
Once a major roadway, significant arterial, is repaved, how long would you expect that to last before another major repaving project would be done?
So many factors, in terms of how much the volume is and the weights and those things. On East Main, it doesn't last as long, or Pinyon Hills Boulevard doesn't last as long as a College. I think generally speaking, for complete paving, I think you could get as much as 10 years in many road segments, because you come back and do the maintenance segments, the overlays, and some of those. The public doesn't always know exactly which system's being used. It may be a thin overlay or a complete rebuild. So, probably 10 years on a rebuild and several on, but we crack seal every year.
Right.
And potholes, I like to talk about potholes, but we patched over 9,000 potholes last year. So that's 35 a day, in terms of potholes.
It's a constant challenge. There's no doubt about that. It's a challenge in the context of funding for it. I'm hopeful that Congress will come up with a major infrastructure funding bill that we in outlying areas like Farmington, New Mexico can tap into. I would like to think that that's a possibility. Our needs are significant, as are those in larger communities and probably even in some smaller communities. Every community has a set of needs in the context of infrastructure. So I think this has been a good update on where we are, and I think it's illustrated the fact that it's a constant process. We struggle to set priorities sometime, but it is sometimes a need to establish priorities. I suspect that there are people out there viewing this segment of the mayor's table who say, well, what about my road? When is that going to be repaved? It's very much in need of it. And again, we have a schedule of improvements that we adhere to on an annual basis, and most of these roads will make it onto that schedule at some point in time. So Rob, I want to thank you again for being my guest on the Mayor's Table, and we want to thank all of you for being with us once again for this segment of the Mayor's Table. We'll look forward to seeing you again next Monday.